Friends, we'll start in 1 minute. Just give us 1 minute and then we'll start. Thank you for your patience. Hello, friends. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and a special Jojolapa today. Welcome to the 9th episode of Caste Conversation. I'm Pradip Pariyar. Caste Conversation is a dialogue to understand the caste dynamics that affect our society, our lives, and our value system. Caste Conversation is an initiative of Dalit Life Matters Nepal to ignite solution-oriented dialogue for the elimination of caste-based discrimination and untouchability. Dalit Life Matter Nepal is a social movement to create a just society where every Nepali can enjoy life without the fear of being persecuted in the name of caste. It is an initiative to counter and fight back all form of caste-based discrimination and untouchability. A collective intervention to ensure every right of every single Nepalese citizen to guaranteed in the Constitution of Nepal. Dalit Life Matter Nepal is a connection with the people to build a collective force and amplify people's power to eradicate any inequality, discrimination, and violence based on the caste system. Today's episode of Caste Conversation brings you Professor David Gellner. Professor Gellner is a professor of social anthropology. He was head of the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography from 2009 to 2012, and again from 2016 to 2018 at University of Oxford. His doctoral research was on the Vajrayana Buddhism of the Newars and on Newar social organization in Kathmandu. He has published a number of books and papers on the issues related to anthropology of South Asia, Buddhism, Hinduism, traditional urbanism, healers and their relation to religion, ritual and symbolism, politics, ethnicity, and activism. He has also carried out focus his research on Dalits. His Economic and Social Research Council funded research project was Caste, Class, and Cultural Changing Baun and Dalit Identity in Nepal is one of them. Professor David also speaks good Nepali and Newari, but we will do this session in English as we have also audience who doesn't speak Nepali and Newari. Also today we have Dr. Krishna Adhikari, who is co-investigator of the research, Caste, Class, and Culture, Changing Bahun and Dalit Identity in Nepal. We will also hear his thought on today's conversation at the end of the program shortly. Professor Gellner, welcome to the Caste Conversation.
Namaste. Thank you very much for having me.
Maybe I can say Jojolapa.
Jojolapa to you, yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Gellner. I had a great chance to work with you some of the project here, a couple of projects here. I would like to thank him for bringing the caste issues into his research work and academia. You have been Nepal, as I understand correctly, from 1975, right?
Yeah, that was my first time.
So looking back and now, what change do you see in Nepal regarding the caste practice? What has been changed and what not? Professor Gellner, you can take 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, well, I mean, I could take 2 minutes or I could take 2 days. I mean, it's a big question. I mean, let me start with a disclaimer. You know, I may have been coming to Nepal for 2/3 of my own life and for 40 years now, more than 40, 45 years. But I'm still an outsider, and so you know far more about caste in Nepal than I ever will, simply by being Nepali, by having been, especially by being a Nepali and having experience of being a Dalit Nepali. So it's you know, in some ways it's presumptuous of me to say anything. But anyway, maybe sometimes you know, an outsider's observations can help and can you know, anyway, at least spark people's thoughts and reactions. So yes, I mean, things were very different then. 1975 is now a very long time ago, and it is really important. I mean, it was after the Civil War. It was really quite interesting to see so many of these foreign consultants jetting into Kathmandu, and they really thought that nothing had changed between 1845 and 1990. They somehow telescoped the whole history, because they had to have they were given these potted histories to orient them when they came into Nepal to offer their advice on peace building. They really couldn't grasp the fact that things had quite radically changed already, even during the Panchayat period. And but still, things. I remember I spent 4 months in the country in 1975 to 76, and we trekked around. I was very lucky that I happened to meet several American anthropologists. So even though I didn't really know what anthropology was then, I learned by visiting these 3 anthropologists in the field. One is now very distinguished American anthropologist, David Holmberg. But there was a cohort of 3 of them from Yale University. The other 2 didn't stay in the profession, but they were doing PhDs. One was Harvey Bluestein, and he was working in the village of Liglig Dumre near Gorka. And Dos May was working in the village of Ganpokra in Lamjung. So we visited I and my school friend Julian Murray visited those 3 anthropologists in the field. We saw what they did. So I had a kind of practical introduction to what anthropologists do and what they study. And I was very struck. I remember sitting in the tea shop in Harvey Bluestein village, the Liglig Dumre, and a Baun came in. No, sorry, another man came in, and a Baun was sitting there drinking a cup of tea, and there was a kind of perfectly choreographed interaction where the Baun slipped his shoe off, and the man who'd come into the shop bowed his forehead down to touch the foot, the now barefoot right foot of this Baun. And this is still very much pressed on my memory, seeing this, just watching this, and nobody batted an eyelid. It was a totally normal and natural thing to do. Things are changing, and let's hope they can be changed quickly, without any more deaths. So that's the hope. But I don't see it as necessarily proof that discrimination is increasing. I see it as proof that people are resisting.
So that means resistance is growing. So that's why we are seeing a lot of violence.
It's an attempt to repress the resistance. It's an attempt to intimidate people into silence. And and we've seen it in India as well. And I don't have any kind of deeper analysis of it other than that, but I don't see it as simply a reflection of increased discrimination. Now, that discrimination has always been there. Discrimination has always been there. Violence has always been there. But maybe now it's now we know about it more. It's easier to find out about it. Communications are better, and everybody's carrying a video camera in their pocket, and so these things get out. It's much harder to hide the evidence. That's what I would say. I mean, I would say, I think I think people have been shocked by the Rukum incident because, partly because that was supposed to be an area that was thoroughly indoctrinated by the Maoists into the idea of equality, and it just shows how skin deep some of the Maoist ways of achieving this are by the intimidatory way of achieving their aims just doesn't work. I think so. People are shocked by that, and clearly, these things are. And there is a rule of thumb, I think, in the hills of Nepal that as the further east you go, the more progressive or the kind of more liberal people's ideas are less I mean, that's not to say that you won't, of course, you probably will find caste discrimination in the far east of Nepal, but taken as a whole and in general, the West is worse. I think there's also, if the hills of Nepal compared to North India actually are more advanced, frankly. And I've done a little bit of research, not a lot, but I have spent time in Gorakhpur and Eastern UP. And I can tell you, I was pretty shocked there by the kind of what Nepalis would call feudal, kind of hierarchical attitudes. Young people coming up and touching your legs as a sign of deference, is still completely normal in North India. Absolutely unremarkable part of everyday life, which you certainly don't get in Nepal. So, Nepal has I think in the past has in some respects was more relaxed, in some small respects it's absolutely not true. Some people who don't know anything about Nepal say, oh, the caste system doesn't exist in Nepal, or it's not, it's complete rubbish, always has been complete rubbish. But certain rules possibly are less strict in the hills, and always have been. And certainly urban Kathmandu, it's now very, very normal to have intercaste marriages. Very normal to receive an invitation which says so and so Upadhyaya is marrying so and so Mananda, and nobody blinks an eyelid. It's completely normal. Now, whether that is completely normal across the Dalit non-Dalit divide, I doubt somehow, but maybe even that has happened. And great, that's great. And a friend of mine even said to me, as long ago as 10 years ago, said to me, David, nowadays, if your son doesn't have an intercaste marriage, you start to worry if there's something wrong with him. So he was joking, but it was a part, half a joke, but it was sort of very revealing about the fashion and the trend and the fact that it's so utterly normalized. Now, Kathmandu is not Nepal, but nonetheless, it is the capital, and what happens there today may happen elsewhere tomorrow. So, I'm not totally disheartened. When I had to give the Mahesh Chandra Regmi lecture, I finished the lecture by talking about that song by Pashupati Sharma, Hami Nepali, which is about it's a Tej song, and I'm sure you know the one, which is all about intercaste marriage. And the song goes, we are just Nepalis, that's all we know, it doesn't matter. And then there's all these examples. And there was a small controversy because some young Dalit activists were very upset because he used the kind of colloquial terms for Dalit castes rather than using the honorific ones, because that's what you do when you're singing in, kind of Nepali folk songs. And I understand this genre is quite common in Nepali folk songs anyway, but I hadn't heard a song like that before. I'm not particularly sentimental, but I have to say that song brought tears to my eyes because why? Because the reason why the song is so effective is because it is so contrary to the actual facts, and that facts of caste do really, really matter to people, but they're mattering less and less. That's the thing, and people are not. They no longer have first of all, they no longer have on the contrary, the official position of the state is to be against them. So that's really, really important. That is a massive change that has happened not quite within my experience with Nepal, but not much more. Within 70 years, that is a complete and utter turnaround. The state supporting intercaste marriage, whereas before the state supported punishing people severely for practicing it. So that is a complete 100%, 180-degree turnaround. So that is a big change. And the other thing is, at the level of ordinary people's feelings, the prejudices are no longer quite. So again, this is something which may be slightly different in West Nepal. I think in far West Nepal, people still believe that the gods will be angry if you don't follow caste rules, and that their salvation somehow depends on following these weird social rules. But I think in the rest of Nepal, people don't think that anymore. People don't genuinely believe that their chances of salvation depend on them excluding Dalits. Do they really think that? I don't think they think that anymore. There may be prejudice, there may be snobbery, there may be class, above all caste, as in so many places, caste is transmogrified into class. So class prejudice may be expressed in caste terms and vice versa. But I don't think people genuinely believe that their chances of religious salvation depend on supporting the caste system. I don't think most people believe that anymore.
Professor David, you correctly mentioned there's a lot of inter-caste marriage happening between non-Dalits, for example, Bahun and Newars and others, not crushed, especially with the Dalits. That's why that's Rukum incident happens, and there are a lot of incident happening right now in Madhes. There's a lot of killing also happening. You already mentioned some of the things. Already you mentioned, but I want to go a little bit deeper on your research, especially. Let's talk about your study on caste, class, and culture, changing Bahun and Dalit identities in Nepal. What are the findings and highlights of this research? Still, you are doing it. What Dalit rights activist organization could learn from the finding of this research? We are taking questions from our fellow participants. So if you can go brief, that would be great. You already mentioned some of the things, but I just want to go a little bit deeper on these questions.
Well, what specifically for activists? We've gathered we haven't unfortunately been able to publish it. We've gathered quite a lot of information about livelihoods and about skills, and both traditional skills and modern skills, and which ones are surviving and which ones are not surviving. So if activists want to get involved with issues of livelihoods, which I think would be good. I think rather than just concentrating on issues of identity and so on, and I mean, obviously the issues of atrocities have to be addressed, but in terms of day-to-day work, I think ordinary Dalits would probably very much appreciate it if Dalit activists focused, on what would actually help them. So I think, looking at some of those, some of that data on which Dalit skills are being lost, and whether they're worth trying to save or not, that might help. But maybe we should bring in Krishna at this point, because Krishna might have some ideas about specific lessons that Dalit activists might learn on the basis of our project. Because after all, he in a sense he was more involved in it than me. I mean, he was there right the way through and supervised the collection of the quantitative data and so on.
Sure, I'll invite Dr. Krishna in concluding remarks. Before that, I have other questions, so let me ask more questions. We have a question from Sunita Rai. What's the reason behind the ignorance and difference of most non-Dalit academics regarding Dalit issues and activism in Nepal? So is the indifference of made academics when it comes to the issues of gender and women's rights?
I mean, you can't generalize. It's very difficult to generalize. There's long been this presumption, this incorrect presumption that, only women should study gender issues, or that, only Dalits should study Dalit issues, and so on, and therefore it's not. So that is the kind of, you have to say when you put a conference on Madhesh issues in Kathmandu, many non-Madheshis are just not interested. Oh, it's nothing to do with us. Well, it is to do with you, because Madhesh is a very, very important part of Nepal, and if Madhesh is not included and is not made to feel that it's included, there are going to be very, very serious consequences for the future of the country. So it is very much part of the country. So I can't, except, academics, there is a problem. All academics face this issue. We are all specialized. We're not employed as generalists. We're employed because we have special expertise in a very small area. And so, and if we want to excel in that area, if we want to be the best in that small area, we have to go focus more and more and more in that one small area and become the best in the world of that tiny area. And that impulse and that necessity to be more and more focused on one small area makes it very tempting to ignore everything that's immediately outside that area. But of course, that's disastrous when everything is interconnected with everything else. So there's a real tension there. All academics feel that tension between trying to be relevant and trying connect what you do to other things, and at the same time trying to, you know, be as good as you can be in that small area. So that is a serious problem, and I think that may be part of the answer to why you know, if it's your experience that Nepalese academics are not focusing in the way that they should on Dalit issues, that may be part of the reason.
So we have more questions. We have a question from Mim Bahadur Pariyar. Do you think the Hindu society can eliminate caste system?
Yes, I think it can. It can, and I think you can see this in certain areas where South Asians have migrated, for example, in Trinidad, where it's virtually gone. Where it's definitely, they're Hindus, they're definitely of South Asian descent. And one of the fascinating things in a book that I edited called Global Nepalis, about Nepali diaspora all over the world, we actually have a chapter on Fiji. Who knew that there were Nepalis in Fiji? But Krishna Adhikari and his co-author found them, and Krishna actually never been there. But you know, there are people who identify as Nepalis. They don't really speak Nepali as such, but they have retained lots of Nepali words in the local language. You know, they speak a kind of Hindustani, Bhojpuri mix, and but they, you know, they have a Pashupati temple, and they kind of identify as Nepalis. And of course, there's no caste in those places. So I think it is possible. I think it is possible. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a bit of time, but we've already seen the change. The key thing is the change of values. Okay, so before 1951, you know, and even long afterwards, in actual practice, people valued hierarchy and they valued difference, and they, you know, they were, you know, outsiders just think all Brahmins are the same, or, you know, one Brahmin is the same. Well, I can tell you, it's certainly not. You know, and Andre Betaille, when he did his fieldwork in a village in Tamil Nadu, he found 17 different types of Brahmin, you know, all carefully ranked internally, you know. So, you know, and of course, the one kind of Brahmin would not dream of marrying another type of Brahmin, you know. So those distinctions have all gone, you know, and that was true even in Nepal. You know, Purbiya Bawan would not marry Kumai Bawan, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Now they're just, you know, now the parents are probably relieved. Oh, at least he married a Bawan, you know, never mind what kind of Bawan. So, you know, it's so things are changing. Things are changing. They've changed a lot in the last 50 years. They'll probably change as much, if not more, in the next 50 years. So it's not going to happen straight away, but I think there are good signs. It's not going to be smooth. It's not going to be bumpy. I mean, so it's going to be bumpy. It's not, you know, it's not, don't imagine we're going to wake up one morning and suddenly it isn't going to matter anymore. So it's not going to be quite like that, but I think it will eventually go, because the values have changed. People's values are now basically egalitarian.
Yeah, that's true. We have a more question from our fellow participant. There is a question from Kusal Pokhrel. Somehow you mentioned already on these questions, but I want to ask, how is the dimension of social stratification, class, caste, and ethnicity changing over the time? You already answered some of the things, but again.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed and I've written about is the emergence of what I call macro categories. So these are the groups like Dalit. You know, when I first came to Nepal, or even when I was doing my original fieldwork, living in Kathmandu Valley between 1982 and 1984, nobody used the word Dalit. The word Dalit didn't exist. Nobody used the word Janajati. That didn't exist either. And certainly nobody used the word Khas Arya. Nobody. That's total. All of these words are new words that have been invented since 1990. And it's so the first to come along was Janajati. It's just at the end of the Panchayat regime it started to be introduced, and I think it came from Darjeeling. But Janajati is again a modern word. It's invented. It's not a you know, it's like so many words in Nepali are kind of modern invented Sanskritic neologisms. Janajati was invented, I believe, but I'm very happy to be corrected if I'm wrong about this, but I believe it was invented in India to translate the word tribe. It hasn't caught on so much in India, but anyway, it has now caught on and become an official terminology in Nepal. And so Janajati was the first. Dalit. Now, what's interesting about the Janajati word is that it's still not fully understood by everybody, by ordinary people. I have systematically asked taxi drivers in Kathmandu over many years, excuse me, there's this word I'm not quite understanding. Could you please explain it to me? And ask them, what does Janajati mean? And about 50% of them know more or less what it means. About 50% do not know. So it hasn't caught on. Whereas if you ask them, these are kind of relatively uneducated people, working class people in Kathmandu, what do you know what the word Dalit means? Everybody, 100%. Everybody knows Dalit is a brand new word which has definitely caught on because it corresponds precisely to a pre-existing social category that everybody knows. So Dalit has caught on in a big way. Caste Arya came last. It's not surprising that Caste Arya came last. It's just like whiteness came last, because it was the unmarked category. But when Bauns and Chetris had to become an ethnic group like everybody else, because of the Maoists, and because of the possibility of ethnic federalism, then the Caste Arya label emerged. When I first started my field work in the 80s, Caste, you couldn't say the word Caste. Caste was like, it was really insulting. People didn't want to be called Caste. But Newas refer to everybody as king, which is because their pronunciation of Caste. But now it's a mark of pride, as with so many things. And so there you go. So that's new. That's something totally new. These new macro categories which club together large numbers of us, so becoming more important, and the actual small, and especially the older internal caste difference, like Chetris. Chetris were very diversified. There were many different types of Chetri, but mainly because many Chetri men had Janajati wives, and their children could become Chetri, but they were kind of slightly lower Chetris. And after 7 generations, the kind of stain, so-called stain of marrying down, was bred out, and they could remarry and so on. There was all this. Nobody bothers about that now. I'm sure there are actually some people who do bother about it, but most young Chetris, I'm sure, couldn't care less about it. So those internal caste divisions have become much less, and among the non-Dalit group, feelings of difference have become much less, and whereas these larger groupings, these larger categories, Janajati, Mudeshi, Dalit, Caste Arya, have become much more important.
We have more questions, actually a very long question from Megan Connolly from Boston, who is about to begin Fulbright research in the field of anthropology in Nepal in early 2021. And since this is a research trip to Nepal, she has long questions actually. When speaking to many urban Nepali friends and colleagues, primarily of non-Dalit and higher caste Newari backgrounds, many are quick to deny that caste-based discrimination happens in cities and is prevalent only in rural space. However, it doesn't seem at all uncommon of Dalits in urban part of Nepal. There is a research from B. Pariyar and J.C. Lovett 2016 to regularly face act of discrimination, marginalization, despite higher instance of intercaste marriage, increased socioeconomic in urban space. As a researcher of non-Nepali origin, outsider, collecting field data related to caste practice, how do we meaningfully navigate an extremely sensitive and divisive issues? Maybe long questions
yeah, I mean,
thought.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, my ex-student Mitra Parya has also written about this. He's written 2 papers about, and he did a little fieldwork project in the UK where he discovered that it's not just in Nepal, urban Nepal, but in the UK also Dalits face discrimination when they answer an advertisement for a room to let, for example. They will go along, and then suddenly the owner will say, "Oh, actually, my brother's coming to next weekend. Sorry, the room's not available after all." Or and sometimes it's quite hurtful, and so yeah, it definitely still happens, but both in the West and in urban Nepal, and so-called high castes are definitely in denial about that. Because they don't have personal experience of it. So it's a bit like white people not really understanding what black people have to go through because they don't face it every single day. So, there is how to handle that sensitive. Then the second part of the question is how to handle that sensitively. Well, everything in fieldwork has to be handled sensitively, and it's a very every field worker has to face that and answer it in their own way. I mean, to what extent you argue with people, or to what extent you just say yes, yes, or you know what's you know say, or to what extent you make it clear that you disagree, and it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult, especially you know depending you know some maybe your actual fieldwork isn't going to raise those kind of issues all the time, and you can just ignore it some of the time. But if it does, if it is you know, if the field work is very centered on those kinds of issues of inequality, then sometimes it's necessary to choose sides and just say, I'm not going to be able to get, there's some people, it's a mistake to think that one person can do everything. They can't, you know, especially in anthropological field work, you know, sometimes you just have to choose, and you say, look, you know, and you know, if you're a male anthropologist, you're never, you know, you're not going to have access to that, the female world, where these, you know, in societies where those two worlds are very divided, and vice versa. I'm sure you know the famous work of Leela Abu-Ghul. You know, she made a conscious decision she was going to stick with the female world, but she produced brilliant ethnography nonetheless. So, you know, you can't. No, everything is partial, and it's all you know positioned. So I think you just have to keep an eye on yourself and keep copious notes. And there isn't going to be. I can't give you a recipe book which will give you the answers in advance. That's not how it works, and it's not how society works. It's not how one's own life works, you know. So one shouldn't be surprised about that. You know, and anthropology is not something to be done by people who are too sensitive. You know, you've got to be sensitive. You've got to be it's a Goldilocks thing. You've got to be the right amount of sensitive so that you pick up the issues, but not so sensitive that you become paralyzed by them. And you know, at some point you've just got to say, well, damn it, I'm gonna, you know, this is where I stand, and this is what I've done, and you know, if it's not good enough, I'm sorry, but yeah. So yeah, that's fine.
Maybe Meg can connect with Professor David later
Yeah.
and talk more. Yeah, we have one observation. I just want to ask this observation and question to you. As a professor at Oxford University who has been engaged with the deep research in Nepal, especially the role of religion of last 40 plus years, tell us a little bit more on why you think the vicious idea and practice of religion, in particular the notion of purity and impurity based on Hinduism, is not toxic and serious in Nepal. For me, it is clear that if you want to understand inequality, indignities, and injustice in Nepali society, one has to understand Hinduism. For instance, how should we understand the role of Nepali state of impact of 109 years of Muliki, and how do you understand the implication of country that dares to define secularism as protecting and respecting Sanatan Dharma in the new constitution in everyday life of people, especially Dalits? And this is an important question while you are talking about the religion, and maybe you are the perfect to answer this.
Okay. Thank you, Ashokji. That's for that yeah, very penetrating question, and put me on the spot there. Yeah, I mean, that wasn't, as you well know, that wasn't quite what I meant. Yeah, you know, I mean, your point is absolutely right. What I was sort of indicating was that, you know, where we know this from many cases around the world, that where ethnic divides line up with religious ones, the ethnic hatred and boundaries become more intense, and violations of the boundaries become more violent and vicious, and that at least that hasn't happened. I'm obviously thinking of Sri Lanka or Northern Ireland or ex-Yugoslavia and so on, those kind of places. So religion really does intensify ethnic hatreds in a way, which I think we do have to be glad that that's not the case in Nepal. Now, as to whether Hinduism has been good for Nepal, no, you're absolutely, of course, you're right. Of course, you're right. You know, the idea of inequality, the deep inequality, state-backed inequality, of course, especially by today's standards, but even by 19th century standards, could be, if you want to use that word, could be called vicious, and has had a toxic legacy. Yes, for sure. It's not, you've brought up the issue of the definition of secularism in the 2015 Constitution. This is something I know a little bit about. The word Sanatan does appear in that definition. The word Dharma does not, at least not linked to Sanatan. So it's Sanatan Deki Chale Ako. Now, so yes, I totally agree. Sanatan in that definition. Why in that definition of Nepal? There are all these other terms like socialist and sovereign and all this. None of those needed explanation. Why did that one term, secular, need explanation? You can well point to that. And of course, the definition is a kind of mishmash of different things. And yes, the very word Sanatan can be, understood as a kind of code, as a kind of dog whistle, if you want to use that term, towards conventional Hindus. But it doesn't actually explicitly say that. And I suppose what that definition actually means, we will only know when the law courts have had a chance to expound it and unpack it. I interpret it, and I've written about this in a couple of articles, and my colleague Chiara Letizia is the great expert on this on the issue of secularism in Nepal. She's done the most research about it. We just finished an article which is going to be in a handbook of South Asian religions on Hinduism and secularism in modern Nepal. And she's written many articles, which I strongly recommend if you're interested in. She's actually gone and asked people in the Terai, and she's also recently worked on the Garimai festival and so on. So she's deeply investigated in practice what does secularism actually mean in the Nepalese context. And so we interpret that definition in the Constitution as meaning that, well, it has given special permission to the state to support Buddhism, Hinduism, shamanism, maybe Kirat Dharma, maybe Prakrit Dharma, born, any religion that is kind of quote unquote traditional for Nepal, over and above those religions which are not, namely Islam and Christianity. So that would seem to be, I stress seem, because as I say, it's for the courts to decide. It would seem to give the state permission to give more support to those quote unquote traditionally Nepali religions than to the others. That's what it seems to do. But we don't know. It's going to be, Nepal has to work out for itself. What does secularism mean in the Nepalese context? Is it going to be something like, Rajiv Bhargava's interpretation of Indian secularism, what he calls principled distance? That is to say, the state doesn't treat all religions alike. It treats them with equity, but not necessarily alike, because their needs are different. So now that, of course, is the traditional Indian approach to secularism. Is unraveling in India as we speak. But Nepal doesn't have to follow India's lead, and Nepal can go its own way and can work out for itself what this secularism means. And actually, the Supreme Court judgment about the Garimai festival, which, as I say, my colleague Chiara Letizia has studied and written about, is extremely interesting, because the Supreme Court judges took it upon themselves to decide what is and what is not Hinduism. And they have a long judgment which looks at all kinds of things. It looks at Hindu scriptures, but it also looks at Western philosophy and looks at all kinds of what other countries are doing. And they come up with the conclusion that animal sacrifice, Bali Pratha, is not a proper part of Hinduism, neither religiously, nor morally, nor logically, nor historically. Very fascinating and interesting. And you can, if you're a scholar of Hinduism, you can argue with this, but that's what the Supreme Court judges have said. And therefore they have said it would be a good thing if animal sacrifice came to an end. But they also recognize that it's not going to come to an end tomorrow. You can't just suddenly stop it from one day to the next, and therefore that the government should put in place measures to gradually decrease it. So that's the fascinating thing that So that's how it's with these kinds of very long and deliberate court judgments that we're going to see exactly how does secularism work in the Nepalese context, and whether or not it favors what you're calling Sanatan Dharma over the other religions that are practiced. That remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think this conversation is very interesting. So I would like to request 10 to 15 more minutes. I just want to extend. That's fine, Professor David. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you. A few years back, we were together in one conference reclaiming social justice, revisiting Ambedkar, the mark of 126th birthday anniversary of B.R. Ambedkar in Bangalore. I remember very correctly. So, and Dr. Puna Nepali asks, how do you link with your research and works of Ambedkar, especially research on caste, class, and culture? So, relevance of your work and Ambedkar, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. And yes, just to mention that conference, it was a fascinating conference. I was actually supposed to be doing fieldwork in Nepal as part of that project that we talked about earlier. And I suddenly got this invitation from the government of Karnataka to go to this conference. I thought, oh my God, I must go. Obviously, I can't say no to this. So I spent, instead of going to the field in Nepal, I spent a whole week in Kathmandu trying to get a special conference visa out of the Indian embassy, which I can tell you it was not easy. They wanted 5 different pieces of, information, and I had to mobilize all my source force to over a whole week in order to get this official conference visa. Anyway, I was delighted to meet Pradip ji there at the conference, and it was a fascinating event celebrating Ambedkar. It was a kind of partly academic conference and partly Congress Party rally. Huge hall in one engineering campus in Bangalore, which could have fit 5,000 people. And Martin Luther King Jr. was there talking about his father's visit. That was really fascinating. And he told the famous story about his father's visit to India, where, a headmaster of a school introduced Martin Luther King to the school children. And here today, we're very lucky to have with us an untouchable from the United States who's going to speak to you. And Martin Luther King was very shocked and taken aback, said, me, an untouchable? And then he went away and he thought about this, and he said, actually, yes, the experiences that I go through every day of my life as a Black person in the United States are exactly like the experiences that Dalits have to go through in India. So that was fascinating. It was really fascinating in that conference to see the links that existed between the kind of Black movement in the United States and the Dalit movement in India, and those go back to Ambedkar and are still continuing strongly today. So I think, there's first of all, there's that question of Ambedkar's inspiration. But secondly, I also think, this is another thing, people think, oh, that's, that goes back to that earlier question about why other academics in Nepal and Indonesia, people say, oh, they think they approach everything as if it's a, only elephants are allowed to study elephants. And if that's the case, then we can forget all academic scholarship forever. If you're not a Dalit, you're not allowed to study it. This is nonsense. If you're not a Nepali, you're not allowed to study Nepal. If we go down that route, we're finished. And so we all have to accept our own limitations, of course, and in full humility. But we cannot say, I certainly, welcome Nepali scholars to come and study the English. I think we badly need that. The specific link with Ambedkar, let me say, Ambedkar for too long has been seen as just a hero of the Dalits and so on and so on. His writings deserve to be studied. He was a brilliant writer. He wrote wonderfully clear English, and he had a lot of really interesting things to say about caste. So I think, and people are rediscovering that. And it's not just in the past, as I say, it was just, Dalit, Ambedkar's writings was something that Dalit should study, but not anyone else. I think everybody should study Ambedkar's writings. I've been very glad to sort of discover them over the last 10 years or so. And I think he talks a lot of sense, and he has a lot of very perceptive things to say about how caste works. And he, of course, is famous for having denounced the romantic view of the Indian village, as a kind of cozy community, because as his own experience taught him that that's clearly not the case. So, so yeah, no, I think we can take a lot of inspiration for what he said about caste. Specifically on our research, I'll pass on that for the moment, but it's something that's I'm thinking about, and I'm hoping that we can make some closer links in the future.
We have more questions. One of the questions from Balaram Guvaju. What is the effect of marginalization of these ethnic people and their ethnic skills and knowledge in nation building? Do you find any significant change in these years in Nepal?
In terms of marginalization of ethnic people, has that become less?
And their skills, ethnic skills.
And their skills. That's difficult to measure, but I mean, one good thing that has happened, is the recognition of the importance of proportional representation. And as you, I don't need to tell you, as you well know, since 2008, there has been partly proportional representation in the national parliament, and there have also been measures for proportional representation, or at least reservations to some degree, in the civil service and in recruitment to other bodies as well. I believe, I'm not sure. Are there reservations for the police and army as well? Yeah. So that is not that's not about traditional skills. It's not about traditional skills, but it is about representation and about marginalized people. But it's not an overnight, solution to anything. Those reservations take quite a few quite a few years. It takes a generation or two for it to have make a impact. But you can see in India that it has made an impact, and there is now a Dalit middle class in India in a way that there isn't yet to a degree that there is not yet in Nepal. So reservations will have that effect in the long run, and they are a blunt tool, and they do create, undeniably they do create resentments and so on, but they do seem to work. Yeah, and there's been some good studies by Ramesh Sunam and others on how these are working, and I think we need more studies of how reservations are actually working in practice. Unfortunately, there are, of course, people who are against them and who are trying to undermine them, and we will see some of that as well. So there is that. If you're specifically, asking about sort of traditional skills of kind of Janajati people and Dalit people, some of those traditional skills have survived. Tourism, of course, as we know, there's certain kinds of craft work that have been basically preserved because of the demand from tourists, and heritage because of the valuation of heritage. That is one of the things. Nepal has some things going for it. It's got its climate, it's got its people, it's got its cultures. Heritage preservation has itself required the preservation of certain woodworking skills and other kinds of building skills. So those things have survived. Things are going to change. Things have always changed, and we're in a period of massive change. And right now, because of all the kind of COVID and so on, it's kind of thrown a massive spanner in the works of globalization. And maybe it's in some ways it's good that people have been forced to slow down a bit, but it's caused huge suffering, which I don't need to tell you. Especially all the Nepali workers and the huge suffering they've gone through because of all this. So, yeah.
Professor David, we are almost in the closing. Before inviting Dr. Krishna Adhikari, do you want to say anything? We have many friends here and so many people watching in Facebook also.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Let's hear Krishna's remarks.
Yeah. Before wrap up today's session, I would like to request Dr. Krishna Adhikari to share his thought on these topics. And then I want to add one of the questions here to Dr. Krishna Adhikari. So Ichakesi asks, how do you analyze the situation discrimination, especially on women of Dalit and group having disability? Maybe Dr. Krishna can answer this in Nepali context. So can you, Dr. Krishna Adhikari, are you listening us?
Let me unmute.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes. Hope you hear me, right?
Okay.
Floor is yours, Dr. Krishna Adhikari.
All right. Thank you. Please just cough when I go over the time, because I don't know how much to speak. Anyway, it was good to. Okay. Sure. I mean, you're keeping the time, yeah?
So, yeah.
You stop any time, so I didn't have to say so many things, and I can stop. You can abruptly stop me. Thank you for organizing this wonderful caste conversation, Pradipji and all the team inside Samata. That's the wonderful thing you have done, and I think this is itself as kind of indication of the activism, academic discourses the Nepali Dalit scholars are taking. We have seen this Black Lives Matter the movement in the United States, and even before the Indians could do, the Nepalis are here, I think, in a way overtaking by leading this initiative on the Dalit Lives Matter, which is very good. I mean, over the years, David and I, we interviewed many activists in Kathmandu, and we learned a lot of interesting things from them about the situation of Dalits in Nepal itself. And there were, I mean, this might be true or not, but they were also having impression that the Nepali Dalit movement is making tremendous achievement, compressed so much over the very short period of time. Maybe the Indian movement, has been going there for a very long time, and they made a lot of achievements. They produced Ambedkar itself, which Nepal hasn't produced its own Ambedkar. Maybe it's in the making. Maybe we can see the Ambedkar from India, because there is no border here. And but Nepali activists, had that sense of pride in the achievements they have made, and some even thought that they have surpassed the Indian Dalit movements. Whether that's true or not, I mean, it might not be necessarily true. David just mentioned about the conference, and we have written a piece comparing Nepal and India. Also, through our caste, class, and culture research, I mean, everybody must have that sense of experience that even though the Maoist movement and many other the recent movements have given impetus to the Dalit gaining rights for Dalits, but we sense that very small scale from ground movements were taking place in incremental order, even in 1960s, 1980s, 1990s. For example, setting up Dalit schools, having kind of deployment strikes, those kind of things were actually taking place, and they gave a solid foundation for the changes we experienced. And of course, the experience of change that we discovered that depends on the person's position, age, various of experiences they've gone through their lives. If you ask an old Dalit man, of the change they experienced, they'll say this is a big change in their life they never thought. And if you ask a young, educated, urban Dalit educated person, I mean, the change is not there yet. We want a complete change. These kind of things we discover, and I think there was a question of in terms of finding of our caste, class, and culture research. We have shared in many platforms, and we can do that again in the future. So one of the findings we have is that of hope. I mean, the change is not only in the social sense. There is a change in economic sense as well. In terms of class, there are many factors in play. Is a migration being one thing. Dalit households are, I think, in the area where we did research. They have the highest number of people going abroad, not only India. I mean, they started to, the effort to go to the Middle East. And we discovered that both objectively as well as subjectively, that the people's class status had changed. They think that in the past 25 years, there's been a tremendous economic change. Even if in absolute term the changes could be small, but the scale of change is very huge. Having said that, I think we must argue that it's not the fact that some people would like to say, oh, no, caste doesn't matter, it's only class, and other people would like to say, no, it's all about class and we didn't need caste, kind of things. I think the both assumptions in the context of Nepal are wrong. Both things matter and should be tackled together. So I'm not quite prepared to answer the question on the disability kind of things. Gender have been part of our research, but we didn't solely focus on gender. So we still need to analyze our data in terms of gender. There have been the honorable studies in the 1980s, for example, by Mary Cameron in Bajang, which, the far west. David just mentioned that maybe the further west you go, the more conservative society is, but it's still that in the 1970s and 80s, the Dalit women were using the tools, what we might say the weapon of the weeks, that they were devising many tools to resist the high caste patterns. So we have found that in terms of, we did a project with Pradipji and Samata, on the school curriculum, which is itself is very innovative project, I would say. We have discovered that in terms of school, expanding or the widening participation in the education literacy in the area where we did studies, the Dalit literacy has improved substantially. In the beginning, like other caste groups, there was a tendency to send boys to school. Then they started to send girls to school, and those who could afford, they started sending to even the private schools. But surely the most of the public schools now become the zone for Dalit women and the poor. I don't know how much I'm doing in terms of my time, and I could speak a lot of things, but maybe I shouldn't in one go.
Yeah, if you finish in 1 minute, that would
be... Okay, I will just in terms of the culture, I think I would say that just to add what David said, we did actually try to measure the people's taste. In terms of taste, yes, we didn't find any kind of distinction that the sociologist Bourdieu found in terms of class distinction in France. But in terms of heritage, of course, certainly everyone knows that there's a very very rich, distinct cultural heritage owned and preserved by Dalits. I think I should not take more time today. Maybe
next time, we'll invite you next time.
And thank you for organizing this and giving me this opportunity to conclude. And
thank you so much, Dr.
Wish you all the best.
Yeah, I just want to wrap up this. Before wrapping up, I just want to acknowledge our friend and researcher Gopal Nepali, also involved in this project with Professor David and Dr. Krishna Adhikari. Thank you very much, Professor David Gellner. It's an honor to talk with you today, and Dr. Krishna Adhikari as well. Thank you very much for joining with us today, friends. We have come to the end of today's episode of Caste Conversation. On behalf of Dalit Life Matter Nepal, I want to thank you everyone for your solidarity. I'm also thankful to my friends Vijay, Prakriti, Britika, Luchana, Vikas for making this possible. Friends, we will see you next week with another guest to talk about the caste question in Caste Conversation. This is Pradip Pariyar signing off for today. Namaste and stay safe. And Jojolopa for David. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. A special thanks to Professor David and Dr. Krishna sir. Thank you very much. It's honor and privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.